Can people hear me?
No.
No? Hello? That's good?
On the phone, so they need to hear me.
Okay. Can everybody hear me now? All right. Comrades, before commenting on the AFL-CIO Convention early next month and what it means for the working class movement, I want to comment a little bit on the events around the 50th anniversary of the 1963 March for Civil Rights. It was formerly called the March for Freedom and Jobs. I had, and I'm not alone in this, had anticipated for some time, as early as last year, that activists, whatever their politics, will try to use the anniversary as an occasion to advance their program. And I think this is what's happening with the big march on Saturday, that I hope we will at least have some fair, noticeable representation. And of course, as you know, along with others, through the People's Power Assembly, we have a very important initiative next Wednesday, not only in New York, but around the country. Next Wednesday is the actual anniversary. It's the 28th. Saturday is the 24th. There are basically three issues that are giving the March on D.C. and our effort on the 28th momentum that are fueling it. One, and this is very important in the South and to some extent in the Midwest, it is this vicious assault on voting rights, which many people had taken for granted for at least several decades, demanding that people have cards with picture IDs, doing away with early voting, a dozen or more ways of seeking to undermine primarily black people and also people of color's ability to vote, also young people's ability to vote. I don't know whether this is actually the epicenter of the attack, but it feels like it, and it's a good thing because we have a party branch there, North Carolina, and they're not only attacking voting rights, they're attacking unions, they're attacking everything. Basically, the ghost of white supremacy is trying to pull the clock back. It's desperate and somewhat pathetic because they see the demographic changes, and they're worried that, they'll basically be pushed off the playing field. But it is nonetheless dangerous, not just in North Carolina or in the South, but in wider regions in the country. We don't think about that too much here in New York, although the elections are thoroughly corrupt and in the pocket of the banks and the bourgeoisie, and you can't even get a third party on the candidate that's progressive, much less revolutionary, unless you have a lot of money. It's another question. The other issues are austerity, the cutbacks. The school closings are very big as part of a drive to privatize public education. The closings of hospitals, which is, there's demonstrations every day. Comrades can tell you they're constantly running from borough to borough to a demonstration to stop this or that hospital from being closed and so many hundreds of thousands of workers from being laid off. And it's all over. New York, Philadelphia, Detroit, etc., including the post office struggle too. And the other issue is the issue that we have paid perhaps more attention to lately, and that is the attack on youth of color, of which the Trayvon Martin lynching and the acquittal of his murderer is sort of the tip of the iceberg. That also includes the police repression, stop and frisk, the incarceration of so many tens of thousands of young people of color using the drug laws and so forth, coupled with record level unemployment. These are things that we've talked about many times. I don't need to go over them, but they do constitute nothing less than a war. It's not a rhetorical flourish. It's a fact, and it should concern us and it should concern the labor movement very deeply, because probably the plight of young workers, in particular young workers of color, but I'd expand that to say all workers, is the plight that organized labor has not paid enough attention to, and it is a potential Achilles heel for them, because if this huge section of our class is not embraced by organized labor, one way or another, the bourgeoisie in a capitalist crisis is going to use one section of the class against it. There's something else going on with the 50th anniversary, and it's a sort of a political, even class divide. Some people know more about it than others. All the issues that I outlined briefly and imperfectly are important, and no issue can be sort of put against another. Well, this one is more important. Nothing can be gained from that. However, there is on one hand the President, Barack Obama, and the old line civil rights movement, which is moderate and bourgeois politically, a lot of forces in the middle, and a movement that's growing up, which may not exclusively be youth, but it does seem as though youth are giving energy and life to the other side of that divide, that political and class divide. And their primary issue, of course, is fighting both the social, police, state, and economic war on youth of color. The more moderate to bourgeois wing of the movement, including the President, appears to be more concerned about defending those rights that are under attack. And that's understandable, and we are in solidarity with them to that extent. Whereas the new movement, the movement that is, at least in an incipient way, potentially more revolutionary and more helpful, perhaps, to a reemergence of militant, multinational working class struggle, is the youth. Who are fighting around Trayvon Martin and stop and frisk and similar issues. And of course, we are with them perhaps more because, even if only in an incipient way, we share their revolutionary aspirations. They have no limitations. One of the reasons why I first mentioned, I think, the coming of the 50th anniversary late last year at our November conference was because I had anticipated that not only would there be those forces who would seize on the anniversary, but the divide that I'm describing would also develop. And it would be a case in which the most favorable outcome would be that side of the divide that is organizing around the anniversary, that is potentially more revolutionary and more forward-moving, would be stronger, so that it could, if not prevail, at least hold its own. And this is without calling for some break. That's not what we're calling for, But all these demonstrations are progressive, and the masses should be there, especially people who are non-white. I mean, especially white people, actually. Everybody should be there to have their program. But it was important and will be important to see how the more revolutionary forces do. And with that in mind, I think comrades should do everything they can to see that our August 28th initiatives, the March from Harlem to the Bronx, and also in other areas, are as successful as possible. Because this is the potential rival pole. We may say a lot of the same things. We have not seen the benefit yet of entering into polemics and attacks on the moderates, except only in a limited way around certain issues. It's not necessary. What's more necessary is that we organize and what we want to do and how we feel about the various forces that are at play in this struggle. That will become self-evident as we become stronger. I want to segue into the labor crisis, which is my main topic for this evening. The AFL-CIO Convention, which they claim will be a big, important landmark convention where they will discuss changing their whole orientation, is a big deal. It's not considered, I think, as such by most of the progressive movement and even the working class. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if many progressives organizing around issues, whether, stopping U.S. aid to the coup in Egypt or Israel or Trayvon Martin, I wouldn't be surprised if they're scarcely, if at all, aware of the AFL-CIO Convention. I think that even within the ranks of the AFL-CIO, there may be more knowledge of the convention, but I think there's a healthy skepticism, even a cynicism, about what it will accomplish, because there's a feeling that, the organized labor, as represented by the AFL-CIO or SEIU and Change to Win, its tradition over so many decades is so moderate, so conservative, so out of sync with the needs of especially the most oppressed workers, that I think some are just saying, okay, I'll see, but I'm not expecting the revolution, the call for the revolution out of that. And that we understand that. There's certainly a basis for that. You don't look to the AFL-CIO to be the one to be leading the revolutionary charge and setting up the barricades yet, But nonetheless, it is, comrades and friends, critical and essential that the party appreciate what this means and that our consciousness of what it means be not only formidable and strong, but more formidable and stronger than anyone else. It already is. I've perused the websites of other left organizations that profess an interest in the working class in their organizations, and I must say I've seen very little on the AFL-CIO Convention, and very little outside of the rhetoric that you usually see, talks against class, articles writing against class collaboration, more militancy, supporting strikes, and all this is very, very good. We've known this, those of us who are veterans of the party and who have had the opportunity to either participate in the labor movement or even be supportive. But I suspect that even in our own ranks, and more so amongst trade unionists in many movements, that we would consider to be very strong and very militant, who are the ones who are always there, general strike, be more militant, fight the bosses, no concessions, no give-ups, good speakers, good writers, and the organizers of various events and conferences that are designed to pull together the most militant, most advanced, most Marxist-influenced sections of the organized working class. Even they are not fully conscious of what is happening. And if we do not catch up, and I know this sounds harsh, but I think that the time for being wishy-washy about it and not being emphatic about it has passed. If we don't catch up, then our conception of the working class over a period of time will fail to be revolutionary. It will no longer be revolutionary. It will be stationary, as in nothing's moving, when in fact nothing could be farther from the truth. Organized labor is entering a transitional phase. Comrades will recall, we've talked about transitional demands. Well, I'm talking about a phase. In so many ways, it seems like so many things are in a transitional phase, including, the death agony of this horrible global system. But I want to talk about the labor movement. It's entering a transitional phase. The phase is going to be long, unfortunately. It's going to be uneven. And I think for many workers, you won't even notice it because everything will seem the same. Workers in the public sector, workers in the private sector are going to continue to be fighting defensive battles, save our pension, don't close our school, save our health care, don't bust our union, reverse this anti-union law, reverse what they did in Michigan, reverse what they did in Wisconsin, That's what we'll see. Those are the activities that will be consumed with, will be running not only all over the city, from borough to borough, but all over the country, where there are battles and workers are under attack. But don't miss what's really going on. The labor movement is in the throes of a fundamental, inevitable, and tremendous transition. How it will all end, we can only speculate. But at some point, maybe after some setbacks, hopefully not too many, the organized labor movement will reemerge in some ways, probably not wholly. It will all of it. It will reemerge in a perhaps radically different organizational form. And it will change ideologically. It has to change. And the most important thing to understand is that this is not wishful thinking. These changes are being compelled by changes in global capitalism itself. I've read excerpts from a speech Marx gave more than 150 years ago at one of the first meetings of the effort to organize the First International. I think it was 1866. So comrades will say, why are you reading that again, Larry? And I promise you I won't read the whole thing. But, with all that I have read, and I don't have expertise on this matter, even in our own writings, which are very good, whether it's Fred Goldstein or Sam Marcy and their books, what Marx said 150 years ago resonates so much. It's so, de jure, so appropriate for today. These are short quotes. Listen to them carefully, comrades. And as you listen to them, think about your own conceptions of trade unions, especially the comrades who are working in unions, and the people that you know who are working in unions. This is Marx. Too exclusively bent upon local and immediate struggles with capital. Too immediately bent upon local and immediate struggles with capital. Now, we're not against local and immediate struggles with capital. They're the first struggles. Usually class consciousness develops on a local basis before it develops on a larger basis, and it's usually around immediate needs. I think some of the very good remarks of Comrade Paul about his experience and his experiences in the shop that he works are sort of exemplary of this. So we're not against that. But what Comrade Marx is trying to tell us is that it's not enough for us just to be in the present and concerned about local and immediate issues. At the same time we're concerned with local and immediate issues, we must also be concerned about the larger picture, not only nationally in the continent, but globally. I'm continuing now. That was me. The trade unions have not fully understood their power of acting against the system of wage slavery itself. They therefore keep too much aloof from the general social and political movements, and think of our own experiences when we try to get union participation, not just an endorsement, but in some real way, against things like the war on youth, or the LGBT struggle, It's better here and sometimes, but it's always like pulling teeth. They always seem to have their own interests, which are separate and apart from the general interests of the entire movement. This is Marx in the same speech where he comments on the future of labor. He was talking about present. Apart from their original purposes, the trade unions must now learn to act deliberately as organizing centers of the entire working class in their broad interests of their complete emancipation. Wow. Wow. Do any of you remember when we tried to hold unions to that goal? Of course we're very tactical and we have a lot of experience, and we have always tried to distinguish ourselves from the people who we consider to be wrong and ill-timed and ill-tempered and ill-conceived, who run in and attack the labor bureaucracy so much that after a while it sounds like they're attacking the rank and file too. And what's more important is nobody listens to them and everybody's happy when they leave. And we have become very skilled at being able to talk to different layers of the organized labor movement, depending on who they are, where they are, and what we want to get out of them. However, I say that to say this. I think we should continue to do that. But we should never forget that Comrade Marx's advice was that the organized labor movement should ultimately act deliberately as organizing centers of the working class in the broad interest of their complete emancipation. If you don't look at it that way, you forget it. And a lot of trade unionists, even progressive trade unionists, I think have forgotten it. It's not their fault. It's not their fault. This is not some big, broadside against very good trade unionists. It's just what happens. It's consciousness, Considering themselves, he's talking about organized labor, as acting as the champions and representatives of the whole working class. And they must not fail to enlist non-society. Who's non-society? Non-society is the unemployed. Actually, in some ways, it's I prefer the characterization, because under capitalism, if you do not have a job, you are purged from society. You're socially irrelevant. They used to call it social death that precedes actual death. You have no standing if you're unemployed. It's why unemployed people feel so powerless. It's why it has, in addition to them not being able to pay their bills and provide for those who look up to them, their self-esteem is so devastated. There's a material basis for that. Marx called it non-society, and his advice was to embrace them, embrace the unemployed. Actually, some of the ideas, we haven't exactly figured out what we're doing at the convention. We got about 2 weeks. You know, the comrades in the labor fraction are working on it. Johnny and others from outside New York. And, you know, by the time we get there, we'll have it. We're giving it a lot of thought. But, you know, one of the ideas, among others, that we're considering raising, if we think it's, you know, that it's the time and the place, is the necessity for the organized labor movement to solidarize itself with the millions of young workers who are either unemployed, underemployed, part-time, or temporary, and particularly those who are more likely to be in prison than have a job, and also low-wage workers, and to call a march, and to use those considerable funds that they have, our funds, the funds that come from the dues of workers who are able to pay dues, and invest that in such a project as a way, not just out of altruism or because it's a good idea, but as a way to embrace in some more meaningful way than being behind some legislation or having a press conference or supporting the Democrats. In a meaningful way, embrace the plight of youth. And this is an act of self-defense, comrades, because if labor doesn't embrace them, another class will, in one way or another. If you don't embrace your class these days, and you leave people out at the mercy of the capitalist class, one way or another, even beyond demoralization and inactivity and suffering, the bourgeoisie will find a way to use them. This has been the lesson of history. And he goes on to talk about the need to embrace migrant workers, and especially the very poor. We would add women, the service sector. And finally, to convince the world at large, not just the neighborhood, the city, the state, the country, the world at large, especially in a country like this, that far from being narrow and selfish, our aim is the emancipation of all of the downtrodden millions. Wow. Wow. It almost sounds foreign. You don't hear anyone talk about the labor movement in these terms, you know. The aims, this is not Marx anymore. I'm going to rely on my notes because I don't have much time, but there's some points that I want to make emphatic because this is big politics, comrades. The aims, methods, and ideology of the working class movement do not stay the same. They cannot be static. To the contrary, they change as the capitalist mode of production changes on a global basis, and as the reorganization of the working class on a global basis under capitalism and imperialism changes. And have we been undergoing some tremendous changes? The old way, and that's the way that the labor movement is addicted to now. What was the aim? The aim is get contracts where you can, get union representation, get a union in, and then from contract to contract, struggle with the boss to win a somewhat better share of the wealth, or what we call the surplus value, that you create. That is the whole purpose of your exploitation under capitalism. Get a little more of it. And then you get a little more of it, and then you sign the contract, and you go back to work. It's important that we say this, because the aim of the labor movement now, and in the consciousness of labor leaders, good labor leaders as well as bad, and even in the consciousness of all layers, including the rank and file, it's not the emancipation of the working class. It's a much more limited goal. It is to get a larger percentage of the wealth that you create, to improve your living standards in a relative way, and then go back to work. See? But here's the problem. You can only do that under capitalist stability. Now we have anything but capitalist stability. We have a global capitalist crisis that is both unprecedented and, in our view, permanent, and only likely to get worse. I think for some time now, there has been an illusion of capitalist stability, because the stock market hasn't crashed about 1,000 or 2,000 points and only seems to be going up, except for very lately. And of course, this is fundamentally because the bourgeoisie, through the Federal Reserve and the other, central banks in Europe and in Asia, have been pumping trillions of dollars into the financial market, making a lot of rich people richer. But the problem is, and this is the contradiction that they're coming to terms with, this pumping all this money in the market has nothing whatsoever to do with production. It has not changed the deepening crisis of overproduction, and at best, very, very small production. Capitalism, from the point of view of production, is constipated, and it's been that way for some time. And at some point, the contradiction between pumping all the money into the financial movement and the crisis of overproduction, which has made the capitalist economy globally stagnant, at some point, those contradictions hit each other and they can no longer exist. And there's a feeling, comrades, there's a feeling that as far as this contradiction is concerned, the shit, so to speak, is about to hit the fan. And some of them are anticipating, sooner than later, a return to what happened in 2008, the collapse of the market, or maybe even worse. The conditions that we have now, and the conditions that the working class must fight under, are different. What are they characterized by? Depression-level unemployment, underemployment, outsourcing, the ability of jobs to move from continent to continent with the push of a button, the radical effect that technology has had on capitalist production, complete reorganization of the working class, where you're not just competing against workers next door or in another city, but you're competing against workers in real time, tens of thousands of miles away. The world is small. Athens, Greece is not 6,000 miles away politically. It's New Jersey. And if you don't understand it, it's a consciousness problem. See? The old way, with the old aims that organized labor tried to function under, they're gone and they're not coming back. I repeat, it does not mean that organized labor won't try to pursue those old methods. They're still going to try to pursue those methods. And what else can they do? On a shop level, on a plant level, at a workplace. And there may even be victories. I think most likely there won't be. But over time, there will have to be this transition to a new method. I want to talk a little bit about that method. Organizing larger sections of the working class is going to be the big issue. It'll be as important as any single demand. Actually, the mass organization of larger and larger sections of the working class to fight in their interests on any basis should be part of the program. It should be central to any program because it's not happening. As far as the organized labor movement is concerned, what practices must it diminish and end? Of course, it has to defend those workers who are organized. Of course, it has to fight the attacks on pensions, the attacks on health care, union busting, second and third tier wages. Of course, it has to fight that. That's like fighting, that's a life and death fight. However, comrades, it can no longer solely base itself on merely defending the interests of a shrinking section of the working class. That's maybe 10, 15%, depending on where you are. When the overwhelming majority of our class is either non-unionized or in many instances doesn't even have a job and is not legal and under the age of 30 and condemned to no future. The labor movement has to transition from merely defending the interests of workers who are already organized, which it must do, to try to find a way to fight for the workers who are not in the organized labor movement. If they don't do this, it will only abet their demise. And this is why they will do it. What is Trumka thinking? Trumka is the head of the AFL-CIO. And I can tell you that while we're not a fly on the wall on the executive committee of the AFL-CIO, there have been, screaming knockout fights there. They all realize that they're in a crisis and that the very survival of the labor movement is at stake. We don't know where the lines are. We can imagine, based on what we know, that there are the more conservative trade unions. There are the unions that don't want to have anything to do with the immigrant workers. There are the unions that don't want to know about anything except their members and, leave me alone. If it doesn't involve my members, if I'm not interested in it. There are the unions who want to gain by raiding other unions. There are the unions who don't care that, the union movement is split and they see the union and benefit from it as being little fiefdoms instead of being together. Something as elementary as being together, not what I'm talking about, which is more visionary and revolutionary. All this must come to an end. We don't know what will happen at this convention in LA, September 8th and 9th, 8th to the 11th. But just consider some of Trumka's ideas. Now, he's not a communist, as far as I know. I doubt it very seriously.
Very serious.
He's proposing that they not merely deepen their alliance with bourgeois progressive groups like the NAACP and the National Organization of Women and the Sierra Club, which fights around the environment. He's not only proposing that they have more contact, he's proposing that they be asked to join the executive board of the AFL-CIO and become voting members. His concern is such about how the AFL-CIO and organized labor, if it's not careful, if it doesn't make a change, how they could get isolated from other sectors of the movement, that he's willing to invite them on the executive board without paying dues, without a traditional union, and to help the AFL-CIO in its internal structure figure out its strategy. I don't know if we'd be crazy about some of these groups. They're progressive, but they're not revolutionary. But the point is, look where they're thinking. When did you ever think that would happen? See? It's important to dwell on this because this is symptomatic of that transition that I'm talking about. Things that you never thought would happen are being considered. Whether they'll be done is another question. We may be very disappointed with this convention. We'll see. What are some of the other things that he's considering? A few years ago, the AFL-CIO set up what they call Working America. I think they say on their website that it's got 750,000 members or something like that. As far as we can tell, and it was a way to bring workers who are not in a union, who have no relationship to a union, into the labor movement. So they'd have some relationship. As far as we can tell, for the most part, they're just a list. That they get emails and maybe they interact on a minimal basis with the AFL-CIO website. And they're mobilized around election to support the Democratic Party. What Trumka and some others are proposing is that they be used as activists to help in organizing drives. Now, imagine if that was if that came into fruition, just 10% of it. If they really have 750,000 members, imagine if 75,000 new activists supporting fast food workers, workers at Walmarts, immigrant workers. Imagine if they were on the streets instead of supporting the Democratic Party or sitting at home. I mean, wouldn't that be something? Yeah. Think about the potential. This is a debate that's going on. Also, they're deepening their debate about how to deal with those sectors of our class, and let's face it, the overwhelming majority of our class falls under this category. Whether they're working or not, are not unionized, and are not in a position anytime in the near future, if ever, to have a union contract. Now you can say, well, you can't get a contract? You can't get union recognition in 6 months? Well, how can you help us? You can't get your members to pay dues. You can't, you won't have the resources to have an office, to have a staff, to have the infrastructure that you need to defend your own workers. You won't be able to give money to the city, state, and national labor federations. You won't be able to give money to the Democratic Party. They think about all these things. That's incongruous. This is the way we roll. We have dues. We get resources from members. See, but there's so many tens of millions of workers who don't have a contract. So the labor movement it can't say, if you don't have a contract, and even if you don't have immediate prospects for getting a contract, we can't be concerned with you. They do not have the luxury to do that anymore. Do you understand that? They just don't have the luxury. That is why they're paying, and I think this is a big struggle. Pam, Parker, or some other comrades who are actually, to some extent, in the organizing of fast food workers in Walmart could shine more light on this than perhaps people like me. But traditionally, organized labor has not paid much attention to low-wage workers. They've always felt that Wendy's, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, what's the coffee place? Starbucks, box office workers, Walmart, whatever, that it's a waste of time. The circumstances that they work under were not conducive to union. And so we have to go elsewhere. Manufacturing, more dense levels of the service industry. They have no longer had the luxury to do that. Even if there's no immediate prospect of workers in Walmart or Starbucks or McDonald's getting a union contract, organized labor has to find a way to embrace them, even if the aim is minimal organization, so the workers there are organized, and that they get a raise in the minimum wage, or they get better conditions, or they get a health insurance program, even if it's not as good as some other workers have, Even if their main enemy is fighting with local, state, or national government around some of these issues. The point is, whatever the details are, they can no longer ignore these workers because they do it at their own peril. Recently, there has been an expansion of what some call alternative workers organizations. What are they? They are the Day Laborers Association. These are workers organizations who, for the most part, are not recognized by their boss, do not have a contract. Our sisters and brothers in North Carolina who work in UE, many of whom are in Black Workers for Justice. Actually, Trumka should bring them in. They could give them some good advice because they have had to pioneer social unionism. They have been forced because of their circumstances to reach out to the community and not just be concerned about some narrow, interests because they're in a right-to-work state. Nobody has a contract. And they've done some tremendous things to get organizations of workers, even sometimes, underground organization of workers in the plant. And I mean, it would just, our friends there, our comrades there, they could write and advise so much on this. Other of these alternative labor organizations are like the Domestic Workers United, or the Taxi Workers Alliance. And there may be some others, but I think those are some of the prominent, both on a local and national level. There's going to be more of them, comrades. There's going to be more of them because this is the beginning of it. Okay, what is the next, where is all this going? What is the next phase of worker organization?